Hello and welcome back. Today we continue our discussion of immediate inferences in categorical logic. So we've already talked a bit about how you can take a proposition and rewrite it in one of four standard forms. We have the universal affirmative, or A proposition, the universal negative, or E proposition, the particular affirmative, or I proposition, and the particular negative, or O proposition. And what we saw last time was that there are in the traditional or Aristotelian system of categorical logic immediate inferences that you can make around the so-called square of opposition. What we want to talk about more now are some other immediate inferences that you can make. So we talked about conversion, obversion, and contraposition. With conversion and contraposition, we talked about how you can convert an A claim by limitation, and you can convert in contraposition an E claim by limitation. We also talked about two ways that you can interpret a universal claim. So recall the distinction between assuming and not assuming existential import. What that means is simply this. In Aristotle's, or the traditional categorical logic system, the universal claim has a subject class of which we assume at least one member to be in existence. So when we say all dogs are animals, we assume that there is in fact at least one member of the dog class. On the other hand, in the modern interpretation, we don't make this assumption. So in the practice video that I'll be posting soon that covers all of chapter 5, we'll talk more about this, but this is just a reminder that we discussed this distinction. And what we're going to work on today is, as I said, another look at the moves conversion, obversion, and contraposition from the standpoint of the Venn diagram. And then we'll take some time to talk about a really important topic, which is rewriting any sentence that's true or false into, or as, a categorical proposition. And this is incredibly useful for us, not just in terms of converting sentences in a way that allows us to work with them within the categorical logic system, but it also allows us to really pay attention to what we're saying logically when we assert this or that sentence. So let's go ahead and get started with the last part of chapter 5. Okay, so just as a reminder, we've covered sections A through F, and today we're going to cover sections G, H, and I. And then, as I think I mentioned in the last video, the video that covered these the first handful of sections, I'll post another video in which we work through exercises and discuss in some more detail how the important concepts work so that you can have additional opportunities to develop the skills that are associated with this material. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with a revisitation of conversion, obversion, and contraposition. So remember what we're looking at when we see in the two universal claims the shading of the area of S outside of P, or the area of overlap between S and P. But what we don't see is the assumption of a member of the S class. So that means, as we saw earlier, that the only inferences you can make in the modern interpretation of the universal proposition is between the universal affirmative and its contradictory, which is the O claim, and the universal negative and its contradictory, the I claim, and vice versa. So if the A is true, the I is false, the O is false. If the O is true, the A is false. If the E is true, the I is false. And if the I is true, the E is false. Now, let's look at this modern interpretation with respect to conversion, obversion, and contraposition. Let's start with conversion. Recall that conversion is a valid inference on the traditional or Aristotelian square of opposition for E and I claims. And if you look at the modern square, you'll notice that there's no difference between the conversion from an E where the subject and the predicate are in standard order, and the E where the subject and the predicate positions are swapped. Same also with the I. Now, recall also in the traditional square of opposition, there is a move that you can make in order to convert the A claim, and that requires first that you drop down from the A to the I. That's the subalternation move. But since the modern square of opposition does not assume a member of the subject class, notice that the area of overlap between S and P in the universal affirmative is empty, you can't drop down to the I claim. So remember, in the modern square of opposition, there is only one set of inferences that is valid, and that is between contradictories. So you cannot convert by limitation in the modern version of the universal claim the A proposition. So conversion is valid on the modern interpretation for E and I only. No A conversion, no O conversion. Take a look now at obversion. Obversion is valid for all four claim types. Take a look at the A to the E with the complement in front of the predicate. The E to the A, again, complement in front of the predicate. I to O, complement in front of the predicate. And O to I, complement in front of the predicate. So remember what you're looking at here. You're looking at you're looking at a visual representation of the logical structure of each claim type. Lastly, contraposition allows only for the inference between the allows for the inference from an A to its contrapositive and an O to its contrapositive. Unlike in the traditional interpretation of the universal claim, where you are allowed to contrapose by limitation the E, you cannot do so in the modern interpretation. So contraposition is valid for A and O in both the traditional or Aristotelian and the modern systems, and it's valid by limitation only in the traditional or Aristotelian system for the E claim, just as with conversion, the limitation from the A to the I allows for a valid inference in the traditional system, not in the modern system. Okay, let's see what you think here. Some violinists are not musicians with perfect pitches, or with a perfect pitch, or with perfect pitch. We're going to make make violinists replace it with the letter S because that's the subject class. The predicate class is musicians with perfect pitch, and the way that we diagram this sentence is by way of the X in area 1, which is the area of S that's outside of P. Okay, so we're now at the last section of chapter 5, and it is a really important section because it helps us to pay particular attention to our ordinary language so that we can discern the logical structure of what we're saying in such a way as to, I hope, not make mistaken inferences. So, what we do here is we take any type of sentence that's true or false and we rewrite it in one of the four types of categorical proposition that we've laid out, and we put it in standard form. So, for example, recall that we need to have not only a quantifier and a subject class and predicate class and copula, but the classes, because they're classes of thing, need to be articulated as nouns or noun phrases. So take a look at the first example. The word disorganized is an adjective, and we need to make sure that we don't have a mistaken predication where we have an adjective rather than a noun phrase. So it's true that you and I will speak in terms of adjectives and adverbs and modifiers and so forth when we're predicating this, that, or the other of some subject. But when we're talking about things, we need to make sure that those things are represented in our language as a noun or a noun phrase. Non-standard verbs need to be rewritten in standard form with the copula are, which is the conjugation, the plural conjugation of the verb to be. You could see, and you will see if you look, in different textbooks using the singular is, and that's acceptable as well. But the real key here is that you separate out your subject and predicate classes by way of the copula, which is a conjugation of the verb to be. And in this example, trespassers will be prosecuted. We separate out the class of trespassers from people who will face prosecution or people who will be prosecuted. And of course, we add the quantifier all. Why? Because trespassers will be prosecuted is a sentence that implicitly asserts a universal. Let's take a look at singular propositions. These might seem a little bit tricky because when you think of singular propositions, you might think in terms of a particular claim. But let's think about what we're saying when we're talking about a singular proposition. We're talking about this, that, or the other named person, place, time, and so forth. And since we think of the named person, place, time, and so forth as consistent over time, what we want to do is reflect that by way of the universal proposition. So my car becomes all things identical to my car, instead of my car becoming something that is my car is. And now you have complicated the sentence in terms of creating multiple classes beyond the two that you should have, subject and predicate. And in addition, my car is not the existence of at least one thing, it's the same thing across all of its iterations. So we get all things identical to my car are things in Joe's garage for repairs. So what you want to do is not only turn the singular into the universal, but also don't forget if there is a missing plural noun, create it. Adverbs and pronouns are also replaced with quantifiers. So when you have the evers, wherever, however, whomever, or you have sometimes, you're going to replace those implied quantifiers with the relevant universal or particular. So wherever there is smoke, there is fire. The wherever is all places. And then we reiterate the places in terms of the predicate class because we need to, again, refer to the predicate class of thing. Now let's look at negations. When we stick in front of a sentence, it is false that, we are going to use a negation. So if we want to say all professional athletes are people who use steroids is false, we will assert it is false that, and then put the standard form sentence, or we will put, or just leave the original ordinary language sentence as it is. Notice the contradictory. If we say that the universal affirmative is false, that means what we are asserting to be true is, in this case, some professional athletes are not people who use steroids. I mentioned earlier implied quantifiers, and here is a list of 3 of the 4 implied quantifiers, and that's because in our ordinary language, these are the 3 that show up as A, E, I, or O. So take a look at the article A. A professor is a human being, and then drop your eye down to the I claim. A professor won the Nobel Prize. The implied quantifier, when you have, in this case, the same article starting out the sentence, is going to be understood in the context of the sentence. So we understand that if we say a professor won the Nobel Prize, we don't mean every professor, just as we understand if we say a professor is a human being, we know we're talking about any professor. The same goes for the universal negative. What we also do with our non-standard quantifiers, whether they're implied or they are asserted but in a non-standard way, is we convert, for example, not every becomes some are not, and think about all are not. You and I understand that the phrase all are not can be understood depending on the emphasis in 2 different ways. So suppose that you say, gosh, these philosophy classes are just so difficult and they're boring and I don't like them. And your friend says, well, all of them aren't, by which they intend you to understand some philosophy classes are in fact worthwhile. So all are not oftentimes means in our ordinary language some are, but it also means, and this is what logic takes it to mean, all are not is saying every single member of the S class is not a member of the P class, and that's a universal negative. So the non-standard quantifiers for the negations will be not every, which is a particular negative, and all are not becomes a universal negative. Here are a couple of ways that you can understand translating conditional claims. First off, we're going to notice that conditional claims are standardly translated into universals. One thing you can think about is this. When you see an if-then claim, even if it's the case that the if comes at the end of the sentence, you're going to rewrite your if-then sentence so that the part that comes after the if goes at the beginning and the part that comes after the then goes at the end. So you end up with the following. A dog is not dangerous if it has been well trained. And that gets rewritten first as if a dog has been well trained, then it is not dangerous. Now, why is this an E claim? Well, let's first think about how we would assert the claim without any kind of negation. So we get the following. If a dog has been well trained, then it is dangerous. That converts to all well-trained dogs are dangerous. Think about it this way. Suppose that I have the claim, all dogs are animals. I commonly will assert that same sentence as following. If it's a dog, then it's an animal. All dogs are animals. If it's a dog, then it's an animal. Where we're getting rephrase, where we are taking the quantifier, we're getting rid of it, and we are taking our subject and predicate class and putting it on the left and right side, if you will, of the sentence. If subject class, then predicate class. But in this case, if a dog has been well trained, then it's not dangerous. Notice what we're doing. We're negating the predicate class. So we're saying all well-trained dogs are not dangerous, and we know that standard form tells us all are not is no are. We can also transpose the order of an if-then claim. So if you look at the example with the two red knots, the word not, the negation, you might think, oh gosh, that's a lot of negations, and our mind tends to want to eliminate those. Well, with an if-then claim, you can simply swap the subject and predicate places and remove the negation, which then yields an A claim. Acceptive and exclusive propositions are also a little tricky for us, but we have a couple of ways that we can think about them that will help us. So let's look at the sentence, only persons with tickets can enter the arena. First, look at the phrase immediately following the adverb only. Persons with tickets. Persons with tickets are the ones that can enter the arena. So persons with tickets is one class, and people who can enter the arena is another class. You can rephrase the sentence as an if-then. It's not the only way to do this, but let's start with this. Think about what we're saying when we say only persons with tickets. That means that if you don't have a ticket, then you can't enter the arena. Now, remember what we said just a moment ago about eliminating the two negations, one each in the if part of the sentence and the then part of the sentence. You then swap the places of the if part and the then part. So you get the following. If a person can enter the arena, then that person has a ticket. And we already know that affirmative conditionals are rewritten as universal affirmatives. Another way you can think of the acceptive case, or in this case, the adverb only, is as covering the necessary condition. So think about it this way. When we say only persons with tickets can enter the arena, we're saying everybody who's got a ticket everybody who enters the arena is somebody who has a ticket. All persons who can enter the arena are persons who have a ticket. Going back to the if-then proposition, we can say this. If you can enter the arena, then you must have a ticket. The only is very similar to, obviously, the adverb only, but notice that the only has the article the. We get consequently a different sense of what the acceptive or exclusive case or relationship is. So here we get Android phones are the only phones imported by her company, becomes all phones imported by her company are Android phones. When you see the only, you keep the order of the subject class and the predicate class intact. Let's go back one slide. Notice when you have only, the order of the subject class and the predicate class when you convert to the universal affirmative is switched. Now let's talk about two translations that are required by certain propositions. Notice with everyone but gamblers sleep well at night, we're talking about the gamblers and the non-gamblers. So we need to specify that by creating two propositional claims that in this case we are treating as a single grammatical sentence. Okay, let's see how we feel about taking a non-standard ordinary language sentence. By non-standard, I mean it's not in one of the four standard forms of categorical proposition, and see how we can work through translating it. A dolphin is not an animal that enjoys captivity. All right, first off, question, are we talking about every dolphin or at least one dolphin? Is it a universal or a particular? Next question is, what are our categories? We've got the category of dolphin and we've got the category of animals that enjoy captivity. So we get dolphins are not animals that enjoy captivity. In this case, the article A in the context of the sentence tells us that we have a universal. Moreover, because we're saying all dolphins are not, we get no dolphins are as the standard form for this ordinary language sentence conversion. Okay, to recap, this is what we know. We know that in categorical logic, we have four types of proposition: the universal affirmative, the universal negative, the particular affirmative, and the particular negative. Respectively, we call these A, E, I, and O propositions. We talked about what happens with the subject class when we say every member of the S class is a member of the P class, no member of the S class is a member of the P class, and so forth. In other words, we talked about distribution of the subject class or not. Remember that the universal affirmative distributes the subject class. The universal negative distributes both the subject and the predicate class. The particular affirmative distributes neither class, and the particular negative distributes the predicate class. The particular negative excludes from itself at least one thing in the subject class, at least one member of the subject class. We then went on to talk about how we can take this understanding of these propositions and draw inferences around what is known as the square of opposition. We saw that we can draw several inferences, some of which depend on knowing what the originating proposition's truth value is, while some inferences are undetermined. So, for example, we know that contradictories, that is, A and O and E and I, are pairs of propositions that can't both be true at the same time, they can't both be false at the same time. So if the O proposition is true, the A must be false. If the E proposition is true, the I must be false. and vice versa. Now, of all of the inferences that we can make around the square of opposition, it's only the contradictories that are carried forward into the modern interpretation of the universal claim. More on that review in just a moment. Meanwhile, the traditional interpretation of the universal proposition allows us to make some further inferences. Contraries are pairs of universal propositions, A and E, that can't both be true at the same time, but they can both be false. Hence, you need to know that the originating universal proposition is true so that you can infer its contrary is false. And if you know that the originating proposition, the premise, is false, the inference to its contrary is undetermined. Why? Because it could be true, it could be false, we just don't know. It depends on the content. And remember, we want to avoid content. What other inferences can we make? Well, let's drop down to the bottom of the square of opposition. That is subcontraries. Subcontraries are pairs of particular propositions, both of which can't be false at the same time, but both of which can be true. So, if you start with a false particular, its subcontrary must be true. On the other hand, if you start with a true particular, its subcontrary is undetermined. It could be true, it could be false. Then we have subalternation. The superaltern, or the universal claim, if true, yields a true subaltern. In other words, the corresponding particular claim is also true. So a true A yields a true F. It yields a true I, sorry. A true E yields a true O. The only other inference that we can make is upward with respect to starting with a false particular. If the I claim is false, the superaltern is also false. If the O claim is false, the superaltern is also false. But we can't make any other inferences. For example, a true particular does not yield a true universal that corresponds to that particular. And a false universal does not yield a false particular that corresponds to that universal. So we're limited in the square of opposition to contradictories and, under certain circumstances, valid inferences for contraries, subcontraries, and subalternation. We then went on and talked about three more immediate inferences: conversion, obversion, contraposition. Conversion is valid for E and I claims and valid by limitation for A claims. What that means is you take the universal negative or the particular affirmative and you swap the subject and predicate places. For conversion by limitation, you drop down from the superaltern A to the subaltern I, and then you make the swap. Conversion is not valid ever for the O claim. Contraposition is like conversion, but it's for A and O claims. And it's a little more complicated to look at and to complete. What you do with contraposition is this. You convert the proposition, so all SRP becomes all PRS, and then you add the complement to both the P and the S. So you end up with all non-P are non-S. You do the same thing with the O proposition. Similarly to conversion by limitation for the A claim, contraposition by limitation works for the E claim. You drop down from the E to the O, and then you apply the same two steps. Just as conversion is not valid at all, ever, for the O claim, contraposition is not valid ever at all for the I claim. Now, it's true you can convert claims that won't be valid as a result. So you can convert an A claim, but it doesn't mean that the inference is valid, right? So don't take my saying that you can't convert the claim as saying that it's impossible to do it. It is doable, it's just not valid. Now, the last immediate inference that we looked at, actually it was the second one, but I wanted to do the mirroring of conversion and contraposition, was obversion. And with obversion, we change the quality, not the quantity, of a claim, and we add the complement to the predicate. So what we would do, let's say with a universal affirmative, is this. We take all SRP and we change the quality to no SRP, and then we add the complement to the predicate. So we get, ultimately, no SR non-P. Then we moved on to talking about the Venn diagrams for each of the proposition type. Before that, we talked about the notion of existential import, but I hope that that idea made more sense once we started making the Venn diagrams. So we used our Venn diagrams to provide a visual articulation of the logical structure of each claim, and doing so should, at least for some of us, help make sense of why, for example, A and O claims are contradictories. Why, for example, on the traditional interpretation of the universal claim, we can infer a subaltern from a superaltern. And then lastly, what we just finished talking about today was the translation from ordinary language sentences that are true or false into propositional logic notation, whereby I mean the standard form, all SRP, no SRP, some SRP, some SR not P. The next video is going to involve practicing with all of this material with the concepts and the skills that I'd like to see you develop so that you are really versed in systematic reasoning. And then you can also take with you to other areas of your life, not only the skill that you build in terms of reasoning systematically, but also some more widely applicable skills like taking ordinary language sentences and understanding their logical structure in a way that you might not otherwise. So let's go ahead and, as our next step, get started on some practice.